Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
My name's Alan, and I've got a story I never thought I'd be telling. It's about my family, or at least the family I thought I had until a few months ago. If you'd asked me back then, I'd have told you we were the definition of picture perfect. I lived in a cozy little house on the outskirts of Boise, Idaho, with my wife, Rose, our 12-year-old daughter, Maria, and Sparky, our hyperactive little beagle. It was the kind of life that felt like something out of a feel-good TV show, the kind that makes you look forward to coming home. That was us, or so I thought. Rose was the kind of woman who could light up any room. She was always organizing block parties or baking something incredible for the neighbors. Maria, with her wild curls and big, curious eyes, was as brilliant as she was affectionate, always buried in her books or running up to give me a hug. And Sparky? He was our mischievous little furball who kept us laughing, constantly getting into some kind of trouble. We were a team, the three of us and the dog, ready to take on anything life threw our way. At least, that's what I believed. I was the guy who came home from work every day, tossing Maria into the air as she laughed, then wrapping Rose in a hug that said, "I'm so glad to be here with you." Life felt good, solid, but, as I'd soon learn, appearances can be deceiving. It all started unraveling one Friday night. Pizza night, a sacred tradition in our house. I grabbed Rose's phone to find the number for the pizza place, but instead, I stumbled on something that had nothing to do with dinner. Right there, mixed in with the usual texts about groceries and school pickups, were messages from someone named Chad. His texts weren't the kind you send to a friend or coworker. They were filled with heart emojis, winks, and things that made my stomach churn. It felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. I stood there frozen, the phone suddenly so heavy in my hand. Could this really be happening? Rose, my Rose, with her laughter that filled our home. The mother of my child, sending hearts and flirty texts to some guy named Chad? I didn't want to believe it. Who would? Maybe it was a joke, a misunderstanding, some kind of prank. Anything but what it seemed to be. I put the phone down, forgetting all about the pizza, and tried to act normal. But inside, I was spiraling, caught in a storm of questions and doubts. That night, I couldn't stop replaying the messages in my mind. I watched Rose and Maria, wondering if I was just being paranoid. But the truth lingered, like a dark cloud settling over our once cozy home. I needed answers, but I was terrified to ask the questions. There I was, playing pretend in my own life, smiling through dinner, where every laugh felt like a lie. That, my friends, was the beginning of the end of the perfect family I thought I had. After that disastrous pizza night, I spent the weekend wrestling with my thoughts, trying to piece together the puzzle that had become my life. I felt like a detective in an old noir film, except the case I was unraveling was my own marriage. It was surreal, to say the least. By Sunday evening, the weight of those messages hung on me like a lead vest. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to clear the air. So, I braced myself and confronted Rose. I remember my hands shaking as I asked her about Chad. She just looked at me, her eyes wide, a flicker of what I thought was surprise. Then she laughed. But it wasn't the warm, familiar laugh that had filled our home for years. This laugh was sharp and dismissive. "Chad?" she said. "He's just a friend from yoga. Someone who makes me laugh." "You're being ridiculous, Alan." She shook her head like I'd said something absurd, like a child misreading a situation. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But there was something in her smile, something off. It didn't reach her eyes. Still, I tried to convince myself it was all in my head. Rose was my wife, the love of my life, the mother of my daughter. Friends send emojis, right? It's no big deal. Nothing to lose sleep over. But then there was Maria, my little girl, my biggest fan. She started acting different. Cold, distant. She whispered with her mom, giving me these long, searching looks, as though she was trying to figure me out. And every time I walked into the room, their conversations would stop. Whisper, whisper, silence. What really broke me was how Maria suddenly started locking her phone. This was the same kid who used to beg me to play games on it, the kid who had no secrets. Now, her phone was locked down like Fort Knox, and I wasn't allowed in. The atmosphere in the house shifted. It was heavy, oppressive. It felt like walking on a floor that could disappear beneath me at any moment. I felt like a stranger in my own home, like I'd stumbled into someone else's story and couldn't find my way out. Am I just being paranoid? That word haunted me, circling in my mind. Maybe Rose was right. Maybe I was being ridiculous. I tried to shrug it off, but every laugh, every whisper, every glance, they all felt like clues. But clues to what? The worst part was the silence. The silence when I asked how their day had been and got nothing but mumbles in return. The silence when I tried to hug Rose, only for her to gently push me away with an excuse about being tired or not feeling well. The silence in my own head as I tried to convince myself that everything was fine. I started doubting myself, my thoughts, my feelings, my instincts. I'd look in the mirror and see a stranger staring back at me. The Alan I knew, the loving husband, the doting father, was gone. In his place was a man who didn't recognize his own wife or daughter anymore. It felt like standing on a bridge, staring at the water below, and wondering if you'd sink or swim if you jumped. I wish I could tell you things got better, but life doesn't deal in fairy tale endings. And this was no fairy tale. This was my reality. It was a Thursday night when I overheard that conversation, the one that turned my lingering doubts into a deafening alarm. I'd just come back inside from taking out the trash when I heard their voices drifting down from Maria's bedroom window. I should have walked away. I wanted to, but I was drawn to the sound, like a moth to a flame. "You should be with who makes you happy, Mom," Maria said, her voice steady and more mature than I'd ever heard it. Those words hit me like a gut punch. This wasn't some random pep talk. This was my daughter giving her blessing to what sounded like the dismantling of our family. I froze there in the cold night air, her words echoing in my mind. "Happy," she said. The irony of it twisted in my chest. Here I was, trying to keep everyone happy, playing the role of the oblivious husband, while this was happening under my nose. A few days later, the second domino fell. I was on our home computer, noticing it was running slower than usual. Being the semi-tech-savvy dad I am, I decided to do some digital cleanup. Rose's email was still logged in. She must have forgotten to log out. And there it was. A folder marked work stuff. Innocent enough. But life has a cruel sense of humor. Curiosity got the better of me, and I clicked it. Unless Rose's job involved exchanging love letters and intimate photos with Chad, then work stuff wasn't exactly accurate. His face, by now, was more familiar to me than my own reflection. Each email was a hammer, nailing shut the coffin of our marriage. "My dearest Rose, I long for the next time we're together. You are my true happiness." I couldn't breathe. There it was, my life, exposed in a series of pixelated confessions and JPEG betrayals. My heart raced, and my stomach churned in a violent mix of anger and heartbreak. Confrontation was inevitable. This time, I had proof, solid, undeniable proof. I printed the emails and laid them between us, a silent challenge. But Rose was a fortress. She denied everything, her eyes blazing with a fire I'd never seen before. She accused me of invading her privacy, of being a control freak. "Don't you trust me, Alan?" She spat, as though I was the one who had brought strangers into our marriage. She turned my world upside down, twisting the narrative until I was the villain. And for a fleeting, weak moment, I doubted myself. I wondered if I was the bad guy in her story, the one who snooped, pried, and shattered the sacred trust between husband and wife. But no, I wasn't the bad guy. I was the fool who didn't realize the happy family portrait he'd cherished was drawn with disappearing ink. The stage was set, the players were in place, and the lies, the lies, were just beginning to unravel. I told Rose I had a business trip, a last-minute deal that couldn't wait. Important stuff. She kissed me goodbye with that same detached peck that had become our new normal, barely glancing up from her phone as she waved me off. As I drove away, I could see her silhouette framed in the window, her phone already in hand. My gut twisted. I didn't head to the airport. Instead, I parked a street over, slouched low in my buddy's beat-up Camaro. Baseball cap pulled low, heart pounding in my chest, I waited. It felt like a stakeout in my own life, which is just as messed up as it sounds. The hours dragged by, and doubt began to creep in. What if I was wrong? What if those messages and emails were just fantasy? A bad joke? But then, as the afternoon sun began to dip, painting the Boise sky in hues of fire, I saw her. Rose stepped out, dressed to the nines like it was date night. But the date wasn't with me. Moments later, Chad appeared, that too familiar stranger. My breath hitched as they met on the sidewalk, laughing at something I couldn't hear, something I couldn't be a part of. Their hands found each other, and that's when my heart didn't just break, it shattered. They were headed to Luciano's, the kind of place with cloth napkins and a wait list. The kind of place we'd reserved for anniversaries, where we'd whispered sweet nothings over candlelight. I followed them at a distance, the Camaro's engine humming low beneath the city's evening sounds. From a parking spot across the street, I watched through the restaurant window. They picked a table. Our table. The one near the back, with a view of the park. When Chad kissed her hand across the white tablecloth, it felt like I was watching a scene from someone else's life. A life I knew all too well. I wanted to storm in, to flip tables, to demand answers. But I didn't. I sat there instead, a silent spectator to my own tragedy. Fury boiled over inside me, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. It was real. All of it. The lies. The sneaking around. The betrayal. It wasn't just in my head anymore. It was right there, tangible and undeniable, like the leather of the wheel beneath my hands. This wasn't a bad dream. It was worse. Because in dreams, you wake up. There's relief. But there was no waking up from this. No escape from the sting of betrayal. It burned through me, hot and relentless, leaving me to smolder in the wreckage of what I once thought was a happy life. Parked in the shadows with a heart full of lead, I realized the depth of the lie I'd been living. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. Her choice. And it shattered everything. You'd think the sting of that moment would have been enough drama to last a lifetime. But life has a way of sucker punching you again and again. You either lie down and take it, or you stand up and start swinging. So, I chose round two. Fueled by the truth clenched tight in my fists, I waited. The next day came. The images burned into my brain, turning every thought into a live wire. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't look at Rose without seeing her laughing it up with Chad. When I confronted her, I didn't come empty-handed. This time, I had a phone full of photos, evidence as clear as daylight. In the quiet of our kitchen, I held up my phone, the pictures glaring back at us like a spotlight on the truth. You and Chad, I said, my voice steady as a drumbeat. At Luciano's. At our table. I waited. I watched her, waiting for the mask to slip, for the lies to crumble. Her face cycled through a gallery of emotions, shock, fear, anger, until it finally settled on something that resembled sorrow. Alan, she whispered, her voice trembling, the first trace of realness I'd heard from her in months. And then she broke down. Tears spilled over. Her hands shook. The affair wasn't news anymore. But the why? That hit me like a gut punch. You changed, Alan. You stopped being fun. You got so serious and dull. Chad, he's exciting. He makes me feel alive. It was as if she had handed me the blame, wrapped up neatly, as though I were the one who'd pushed her into someone else's arms. I stood there, dumbfounded, my anger slowly morphing into rage. Then Maria. She had been a quiet presence in the hallway, but at her mother's cry, she stormed in like a summer storm. Dad, how could you? She screamed, her little face twisted in anger. You made Mom unhappy. You're a liar. My own child. My little girl. She looked at me like I was the monster under the bed, the villain in the story. The world around me seemed to disappear as her words pierced through me, each one a verdict of guilt. I wanted to reach out to her, to explain, to make her see. But she was past listening. And there it was. My family, a house of cards caught in a windstorm. The confrontation I thought would be the end was only the beginning. A twisted path leading deeper into a thicket of blame and hurt. I was the husband who lost his wife to a fantasy. The father whose daughter turned against him. The man who thought he could fix everything, only to realize that some breaks can't be mended. So, I laid it all out. What did I get? A broken heart, a daughter who thought I was the bad guy, and a home that felt like a war zone. I stepped into the ring expecting a fight, but I wasn't ready for this kind of battle. The kind where even when you're right, you're wrong. The kind where the ground falls out from beneath you, and you're left falling with nothing to hold on to. After the shouting subsided and the house settled into heavy silence, I was left alone with the shattered remnants of what used to be my life. That night, as darkness enveloped me, the scenes of betrayal played over and over in my mind like a twisted highlight reel. By dawn, when the first pale streaks of light touched the room, I made up my mind. No more Mr. Nice Guy. No more Alan the doormat. It was time for action. First things first, money. It always comes down to money, doesn't it? I logged into our online banking with grim determination. My fingers didn't hesitate as I transferred the bulk of our savings into a new account, just my name on it this time. Next, the credit cards. Snip, snip. All of Rose's cards cut off. She wouldn't be whining and dining with Chad on my dime anymore. But that was just financial foreplay. The main event was Chad, or more specifically, his unsuspecting wife. How do you tell a stranger that their life's about to implode? There's no Hallmark card for this kind of news. I found her on social media. A smiling picture of her with Chad. #soulmates. The irony wasn't lost on me. I called her, my heart pounding like a drum solo, and asked if we could meet. She sounded confused but agreed. We picked a neutral spot, a coffee shop where the baristas were too busy to eavesdrop. Sitting across from her, I felt like I was holding a grenade with the pin already pulled. I took a deep breath and laid it all out, the emails, the photos, the late-night whispers. She listened, her face going from confusion to horror, then to a kind of numb resignation. I watched her world crumble before my eyes, and something inside me cracked. What was I doing? Was I seeking justice, or was I just spreading pain? But there was no going back. I'd opened Pandora's box, and all the dark things flew out, wild and uncontrollable. She thanked me with a voice barely above a whisper and walked away. I have no idea what happened to her after that, but I knew I'd set fire to Chad's life just as surely as he had to mine. I drove home that day feeling like an avenging angel, cold and righteous. But as the adrenaline faded, doubt began to creep in. I had struck back, but at what cost? Rose's world had been shaken, sure, but so had Maria's and Chad's wife. She had become another victim in a game she didn't even know she was playing. Revenge is a strange thing. It's bitter and sharp, spreading like wildfire, burning everything it touches, leaving you questioning whether the warmth was worth the ashes. So, there I stood, the architect of my own vengeance, surrounded by the ruins of what I'd destroyed, uncertain if I felt like a hero or a villain. But one thing was clear. There was no turning back. The die had been cast, the cards laid on the table, and the game. Well, the game had only just begun. The first domino to fall was Chad. It turns out, Chad's wife wasn't the type to cry herself to sleep. She was a warrior, a woman of action. She marched straight to Rose's workplace and dropped the bomb about the affair, complete with the emails and photos I'd provided her. The company had a strict policy against fraternizing, especially the kind involving married people having affairs. Chad was out of a job before you could even blink. News of his job loss spread like wildfire through our social circles. People I hadn't heard from in months started texting me, asking if I was okay. I wasn't. I was the farthest thing from okay. Rose was livid when she found out. She came at me like a hurricane, her words laced with venom. "You've destroyed everything, Alan," she screamed, her face flushed, fists clenched at her sides. "You're vindictive, spiteful." The thing she called me would have made a sailor blush. But worse than Rose's fury was Maria's silence. She wouldn't look at me. She wouldn't speak to me. She moved around the house like a ghost, her eyes hollow, her voice gone. She had been my chatty, bubbly little girl, and now nothing. I might as well have been invisible. When I tried to talk to her, to explain why I'd done what I did, she simply shook her head and said, "You broke us, Dad. You broke everything," then walked away. That hurt more than any shouting match with Rose. My daughter, my heart, looked at me like I was the villain, like I had purposely destroyed our family for no reason at all. So, there I was, the man who had pulled the thread that unraveled the tapestry of his own life. I had wanted justice, or maybe it was revenge. I'm still not sure. What I ended up with was a lonely house and a one-way ticket to Pariahville. It's strange how you can be surrounded by people and still feel utterly alone. That was me. I was the man caught in the eye of the hurricane, watching as everything I'd known was torn apart. I started this chain reaction thinking I'd come out the other side feeling vindicated, feeling right. Instead, I felt empty. There's no glory in being the agent of chaos in your own story, no matter how justified you feel. All that's left is the fallout, and fallout, as I learned, lingers long after the bomb has exploded. As the days turned into weeks, and the drama refused to quiet down, I did what I thought I'd never do. I filed for divorce. It was a word that tasted like ash in my mouth, a word that, once spoken, couldn't be taken back. The papers were stark, black ink on white paper spelling out the end of a once beautiful chapter. When it came to Maria, my shining star, I wanted to fight for her. I wanted to pull her out of the crossfire and into safety. But when we sat down in those sterile offices with lawyers who spoke in cold, clinical terms, Maria's voice was quiet but firm. "I want to stay with Mom." That cut deeper than any betrayal. Rose had cheated, lied, and broken our vows, but Maria still saw her as home. So, I moved out. I left the house with a bag of clothes and a heart so heavy I could barely carry it. I found a small apartment on the other side of Boise, a place with bare walls and a view of the parking lot. It was a far cry from the home I'd built, full of laughter and dreams. At night, I'd sit in the silence, deafening in its weight, and wonder if any of it was worth it. The truth had not set me free. It had put me in a different kind of prison, one with bars made of memories and what-ifs. I missed Maria fiercely every single day. I'd reach for my phone to send her a message, to try to bridge the gulf between us, only to remember her words and let the phone fall back into my pocket. Sometimes I'd drive by the house, slowing down just enough to catch a glimpse of the life I'd left behind. I'd see her through the window, and my heart would lurch, but I never stopped. I never got out, because she wasn't mine to hold on to anymore, not really. And so, here I am, Reddit, the guy who blew up his life in search of something like justice. I sit in my apartment, surrounded by secondhand furniture, wondering if any of it was worth it. The truth, it's a double-edged sword. It cuts both ways, and in the end, nobody wins. The cost of truth was high, too high. It cost me my daughter's laughter, my wife's touch, the joy of being a family. Now, I'm left wondering if ignorance truly is bliss, or if the burden of knowledge is the price we pay for some deeper understanding. I guess the moral of my story is this. The truth will set you free, sure, but it will tear everything else down in the process. And once everything you love lies in rubble at your feet, freedom starts to feel a lot more like being lost. After the storm that had torn apart my life, it felt as though I was standing in the ruins of what once was, unable to find my footing. My ex-wife, Rose, and her lover, Chad, were gone in a tragic accident. It was a sudden, irreversible change, and while it took a long time for me to process, it did leave me with one unexpected gift: custody of my daughter, Maria. But life doesn't always give you things wrapped up in neat little bows. Maria and I, after everything, were still far apart. She was 18 now, an adult who had made her own choices, and those choices had taken her away from me. She left home, and our relationship, once close and full of promise, was now nothing more than a distant memory. We didn't speak. She blamed me for the collapse of our family, and I couldn't blame her for it. But that didn't make the silence any easier to bear. The day I received full custody of her, I thought I'd feel a sense of victory, of completeness. But instead, it felt hollow, like I was holding on to something that wasn't truly mine anymore. I tried to reach out to her, tried to make amends, but Maria had already made her decision. Months passed, and I found myself stumbling through life again. But this time, there was someone new in it. Her name was Emma, and she was nothing like anyone I had ever met. She was patient, kind, and saw me for who I was, not for the mistakes I'd made or the pain I'd caused. It started off slowly, a friendship, a shoulder to lean on, but over time, we became something more. With Emma by my side, I started to see light again. She was an artist, her world filled with color and possibility, and she opened my eyes to a life I thought I'd lost forever. We spent days walking through her galleries, evenings cooking together, and nights just talking about everything and nothing. Emma gave me a hope I hadn't had in years, and little by little, I began to realize that I was capable of loving again, of being loved. But even with Emma in my life, the ache for Maria remained. I kept hoping that, someday, we could repair the rift, but I also knew it wouldn't be easy. I had to let her find her own path, just as I had found mine. Then, out of nowhere, one day I got a letter from Maria. It was short, cold at first, but I could hear the cracks in the words. She was struggling, unsure of who she was and where she was supposed to go. She asked if she could visit. I was terrified, but I didn't hesitate. I welcomed her into my home, my heart racing. When I opened the door, I saw a young woman. But beneath it all, she was still my little girl. The hurt was still there. The walls between us were still tall, but the silence was gone. We talked, awkwardly at first, but it was a start. Slowly, very slowly, the distance began to close. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't easy. We had long conversations, some tearful, some filled with anger, but over time, we learned to understand each other again. I apologized for my mistakes, and she apologized for the way she had shut me out. And in those moments, I realized that perhaps, just perhaps, the fairy tale ending I had once thought impossible was still within reach. As the years went by, Emma and I built a life together. And while Maria and I were still finding our way back to each other, there was hope, real, tangible hope, that one day, we would be a family again. Not the one we had been, but one that had survived the storm and was learning to thrive in the aftermath. I don't know what the future holds, but for the first time in a long time, I can honestly say I'm looking forward to it. With Emma by my side and Maria slowly coming back into my life, it feels like maybe, just maybe, I'm living my own version of a fairy tale after all. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.